If you've ever driven through the backroads of Appalachia, you know this. The dark out here doesn't just fall, it settles. The stories people whisper? They're not just tales, they're warnings carried down. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It always gives me chills thinking about all of us in different places, staring into the same shadows together. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It helps more people stumble into these woods, even if they might regret it. Let's begin. I was 29 the summer it happened. At the time, I worked as a wildlife photographer for a small regional magazine in Knoxville. I wasn't rolling in money, but I loved my job, chasing light through forests, capturing foxes at dawn, cataloging the things people pass by. That July, the editor pitched me a strange assignment. People eat up forgotten towns, lost highways, local legends. Take a drive with a couple of writers and see what you find. Give me something spooky, something people talk about. So I went. My companions were Ruth, a journalist with a sharp tongue, and Alan, a history buff who collected maps the way kids collect baseball cards. We had a cooler of sandwiches, a pair of tents, and Alan's endless pile of old paper atlases. We cut southeast through the Smokies, aiming to photograph abandoned rail stops and empty hamlets. The roads twisted, the air was thick with pine and humidity, and for a while, it felt like a vacation disguised as work. We were somewhere near the Tennessee-North Carolina border when Alan jabbed a finger at his map. "This one," he said, grinning like a gambler about to place a bad bet. "Burnt Timber Hollow, Old Forest Road. Not on Google. Cuts through straight to the next county. Saves us an hour." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Saves us an hour or gets us killed?" Alan just shrugged. "Both can be true." I was driving. Against my instincts, I turned down the road. It wasn't much, a single strip of cracked asphalt, no lines, no shoulder. The trees pressed close, their branches arching overhead like ribs forming a cage. My cell signal dropped within minutes. For a while, it was just road and trees. Too many trees. They looked organized. Same spacing, same height, same perfect green. I snapped a photo muttering, "This looks fake." Ruth leaned forward, eyes narrowed, like someone planted the same tree on loop. That's when I saw her. She stood on the right shoulder, back to us. Barefoot, white dress brushing the ground, long gray hair hanging in a curtain down her spine. She didn't move, didn't even twitch as we passed. The silence in the car was instant and heavy. Ruth broke it. Did she have a face? Alan chuckled nervously. Of course she had a face. Ruth shook her head hard. No, I mean it. Did you see one? I hadn't looked close, but my gut told me she was right. I pressed the gas. The trees swallowed her behind us. But 5 minutes later, she was there again. Same side of the road. Same posture. Same hair spilling like a veil. This time I braked hard. Gravel spat. We climbed out. She was gone. Just gone. We searched up and down the shoulder. Nothing. Not a broken branch. Not a single footprint in the dust. Alan muttered, maybe locals. Old mountain families. They don't like outsiders. But Ruth was pale. Locals don't vanish into thin air. We got back in. I turned the car around. The road behind us looked different, stretched, repeating. A leaning pine with a scar on its bark appeared to the left, then again to the right, like the forest was copying itself. Alan whispered, "We're stuck." Ruth snapped, "Shut up." But I felt it too, the sense that the road wasn't leading out anymore. Then we saw her again. She stood in the middle of the road this time, facing us. Her arms hung too long, fingers nearly grazing her knees. Her head tilted at a grotesque angle, like a doll twisted too far. And her face, there wasn't one, just smooth waxy skin where eyes and mouth should be. I swerved. Tires screamed. We shot past her, and the rear view showed nothing but empty road. Nobody spoke. We just drove, waiting for something, anything to change. When it finally did, it wasn't better. A one-story house appeared ahead, half collapsed, its roof bowed in the middle. No driveway, no mailbox. Just dumped in the woods like it had been dropped there by accident. The car slowed. I pressed the gas. Nothing. Pedal to the floor, and we rolled to a crawl, then a stop, 20 feet from the porch. The engine clicked uselessly. Alan, stubborn as always, said, "Maybe there's a generator. Or a phone." Ruth grabbed his arm. "You're insane." But he was already walking toward the porch. We followed. Not because we wanted to, but because staying alone on that road felt worse. The porch moaned under our weight. Inside smelled like mold and pennies, sweet and metallic. Every room looked the same. Warped wallpaper peeling, broken windows, dust inches thick. No furniture. No life. At the end of a hallway was a door. Alan opened it. A stairwell led down. I said, "Don't." He went anyway. He took 3 steps and vanished. Not tripped, not slipped. Just gone. 1 second there, the next erased. No sound. No body. Just absence. Ruth screamed. She bolted. I followed, heart clawing at my ribs. When we stumbled out onto the porch, the car was idling. Lights on. Engine humming like it had never died. We didn't question it. We ran. I threw it into reverse and tore back down the road. The house was gone. So was she. We hit gravel an hour later and nearly wept at the sight of a lumber truck pulled off on the shoulder. We told the police Alan wandered off while hiking. Missing persons report, search parties, the whole thing. They found nothing. No house. No road marked Burnt Timber Hollow. And Ruth, she doesn't speak to me anymore. Sometimes when I'm editing photos late at night, I see her. Not in the woods, not on the road. In the reflections of my office window. A woman in white, with no face at all. And each time I blink, she's closer. My name is Caleb Warren, and at the time this happened, I was 41 years old. I worked for the state of West Virginia as a land surveyor. It wasn't glamorous, but I had a strange fondness for it. I spent my days dragging tripods and notebooks through forgotten ridges, documenting old park boundaries no one cared about anymore. That fall, the department gave me a simple assignment. Check 3 disputed parcels on the edge of Monongahela National Forest, near an area people called Burnt Ridge. The region had been ignored for years, too steep for development, too remote for most hikers. My job was to confirm whether the land was worth absorbing into the park system. I figured it would be 4 days of quiet work. I like quiet. I packed my truck with measuring gear, a tent, and a cooler full of gas station food. No partners, no co-workers, just me and the mountains. I was glad for it. The drive-in felt like 100 others I'd done. Small towns that looked like they hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 70s. Churches with peeling billboards warning sinners about hellfire. Rusted barns half swallowed by vines. I followed my map through switchbacks and hollows until I hit an old forest road, little more than a scar of asphalt beneath overhanging limbs. I hadn't seen another car in hours. The road ended at a ridge overlooked with a warped wooden fence and a half-rotted historical marker. I brushed off the rust and read what little I could. Skirmish site. Confederate deserters. 1863 burned timber. The name clicked. Burnt Ridge. The view stretched for miles, nothing but treetops rolling into the dusk. Too still. No birds. No insects. Just a silence that felt like cotton stuffed in my ears. I set up camp a few yards from the overlook, pitched the tent, and cooked canned stew over a little burner. As darkness folded in, I crawled into my sleeping bag. That's when I heard the first knock. It sounded like a single rap of wood on wood. Dull, heavy, somewhere in the trees below the ridge. I held my breath. I'd worked enough nights outdoors to know animals can make strange sounds, but not that. Then came another knock. Closer. I sat up, unzipped the tent, and peered out. Nothing but trees bending in moonlight. My flashlight beam caught only bark and branches. Then 3 knocks, measured and deliberate, from the other side of camp. I froze. People in the Appalachians whisper about tree knocking. Supposedly, it's how the old mountain spirits call each other, or call you. I tried to laugh it off. My breath fogged in the cold night air. I zipped the tent tight and gripped my surveyor's compass until my knuckles ached. Sleep never came. At dawn, I packed faster than I ever had in my life. My job was to hike down a marked trail and find an old property marker, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. The trail wound steeply down the ridge. Around one bend, my compass needle spun uselessly. Around another, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. 3 figures stood among the trees, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought they were hikers, but their bodies were wrong. Too tall, shoulders slumped, heads tilted skyward as though studying the branches. Their clothes looked like strips of cloth hanging in tatters, and each of them was utterly still. I blinked, and they were gone. I told myself my eyes were tired. I kept walking. By afternoon, I reached a clearing where my map showed nothing. But there it was, a 1-story house half collapsed, sitting like a forgotten tooth among the pines. No road led to it. No foundation should have lasted. My truck was a mile back, the compass still spinning, no signal on my phone. Against every instinct, I walked closer. The porch sagged beneath me. Inside smelled of rust and mildew. The rooms were bare except for water-stained wallpaper and broken floorboards. At the end of a hall, I found a door that led downward. Steps into black. I stood at the top, flashlight trembling. I knew better. I turned back. That's when the knocking started again. Once. Twice. 3 times directly beneath me. I bolted. I half ran, half stumbled back to the truck. When I turned the key, the engine caught instantly, though the night before it had refused to start. Relief came too fast, too heavy. As the headlights swept across the trees, I saw them again. 3 figures at the tree-line, staring up, their heads tilted so far back I could see their throats. And behind them, deeper in the shadows, a 4th one, taller than the rest. Its arms dangled past its knees, and where its head should have been, antlers jutted forward, snapped and crooked like broken branches. I didn't wait. I floored it, tearing down the ridge, gravel spitting from the tires. Every turn felt too sharp, every shadow too long. When I finally hit paved road again, I almost wept. 15 minutes later, I found a diner by the highway, neon sign flickering like it might burn out at any second. Inside, the waitress poured coffee without asking questions. She looked like she'd seen plenty of men stumble in hollow-eyed. But when I mentioned Burnt Ridge, her hand froze around the pot. She set it down carefully, leaned close, and said only, "They don't like being seen." Then she walked away. I drove home the next morning, shaking all the way. But the story doesn't end there. When I laid out my survey notes, I noticed something wrong. My map, the same state-issued chart I'd used for years, had changed. Where the disputed parcels should have been, where my routes were penciled in, there was only one label written across the ridge in faded letters. The Watchers, and all 3 of my survey trails, every line I had marked, looped back to the same point, right where I'd parked my tent. I still worked for the department, still tramped through forests with my compass and notebook. But sometimes, when I lay my gear out on the hood of my truck, I hear it again, 3 slow knocks echoing from the tree-line, calling, waiting, and I know one day I'll turn my head just a little too slowly, and they'll be standing there again. Not 3 this time, 4. My name is Daniel Harper, and I'm 38 years old. By trade, I'm a civil engineer, though most days it feels more like a prison sentence than a career. Designing drainage systems and repaving county roads doesn't exactly make your heart race, but it pays the bills. Last summer, my oldest friend, Miles, convinced me to take a few days off. He's the opposite of me, adventurous, reckless, constantly sniffing out hidden history. If there's a decayed mill or rusted bridge within 50 miles, he's already trespassed it. His idea was a detour through the Barrow Glen region of the Appalachians, a place neither of us had been. "It's off the beaten path," he told me. "Ghost towns, forgotten trails. You'll love it." I didn't say yes right away. I knew his definition of love usually involved tetanus shots and trespassing charges. But my life had shrunk to blueprints, deadlines, and the same takeout dinners. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We left Raleigh aiming toward Kentucky, no real destination. Just 2 men with nothing better to do. Barrow Glen wasn't on any GPS map. The closer we got, the more the signal sputtered. By the time we reached a turn marked by a crooked iron signpost, our phones were useless. The road narrowed, swallowed by trees. It felt less like driving into a town, and more like being absorbed into the forest's throat. Eventually buildings appeared, if you could call them that. A post office with shattered windows, a diner whose roof sagged like broken ribs, and a church with no steeple, its bell missing. Not a single soul in sight. Miles was giddy. "This is it," he said, as though we'd discovered buried treasure. Barrow Glen. I wanted to leave. Every shuttered door and silent porch screamed wrongness. But he urged us forward, deeper into the skeleton of the town. At the end of the street, the trees thinned, and we saw it. An archway of stone, weathered but intact, spanning a gravel path. Words were etched into the rock, faded almost beyond reading. Walk true through Barrow's gate. Above the arch, crude carvings of faces peered down. Not saints or angels. These were grotesque, elongated, mouths sewn into grim lines. Miles practically bounced. They called this place a summer retreat back in the 30s. Had cabins, a theater, even a little fairground. Supposedly it all burned down. Nobody ever rebuilt. The gravel lot stretched out in front of the arch like an invitation. Against my instincts, we parked. We stepped under the arch. I don't know how to explain it except to say the world stopped. The air felt heavy, like a blanket smothering sound. Our footsteps dulled instantly. No crunch of gravel, no bird song, no wind. Just silence thick enough to choke on. Past the arch, cracked pavement led deeper into what remained of Barrow Glen's retreat. Moss covered the asphalt in patches. A carousel leaned to one side, its horses stripped of paint and eyes. A faded theater marquee announced a play that never happened. The Hollow Man, one night only. Miles snapped photos like a tourist. I hung back, my skin prickling. On the far edge of the retreat stood something out of place. A maze of pale wooden panels, about 8 feet tall. Unlike everything else, it looked new. The paint was too clean, the corners too sharp. Over the entrance, someone had scrawled in dripping black letters. "Step in and be seen." The paint was so fresh I could smell it. "Miles," I called, "this isn't right. Someone's been here. Let's go." But he was already moving toward the entrance, drawn like a moth to a flame. I cursed and followed. The maze swallowed us instantly. The panels didn't creak or echo. They were unnervingly smooth, as though sanded and polished by invisible hands. I tried to keep it simple, left turns only. That was my engineer's brain, applying order to chaos. But soon I felt it footsteps. Not echoes. Real footsteps shadowing mine. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they resumed. I turned corners expecting to see Miles. Nothing. Instead, the walls began to change. Small peepholes appeared at irregular intervals. Against my will, I leaned into one. The first showed only blank wood on the other side. The second showed a face, Miles's face, inches from mine, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. I recoiled and bolted around the corner. Nothing. Just more walls. The maze funneled me into a square chamber. All 4 walls were mirrors, as was the floor. No ceiling, just a sickly gray sky peering down. I saw myself, but wrong. My reflection lagged, hesitated, as though deciding what to do. Then it moved without me, tilted its head, smiled. I backed up, heart hammering. Every reflection around me began to grin, slowly, like a contagion spreading from glass to glass. I slammed into one wall. The mirror cracked. Behind it was only darkness. I crawled through. I landed on dirt. A crawl space, roots dangling, the smell of damp earth and iron filling my nose. Pipes jetted out, dripping brown water. I shuffled forward, palms scraping the walls. My hand brushed something, a footprint pressed into the mud. Boot prints. Miles's, maybe. They led to a sagging wooden panel. I pushed it open. It was a maintenance room, or had been. Water-stained wallpaper peeled from the walls. Rusted lockers leaned at odd angles. Miles was there, crouched in the corner, arms hugging his knees. "Thank God," I whispered. He didn't move. When I stepped closer, he whispered, "Not me." Then he turned. His eyes were raw, bloodshot, too wide. His fingernails were black with dirt, as though he'd clawed at walls for hours. "Did it follow you?" he rasped. I pulled him to his feet. His body trembled like a tuning fork. He reeked of copper and sweat. We crawled back through the tunnel. My flashlight died midway, leaving us in a blackness that felt alive. Miles muttered something the entire time, low and rapid. Numbers. 6913. Over and over. When we finally pushed out behind the maze, the sun was gone. The air was colder. I dragged him to the car. He wouldn't sit until I checked the back seat twice. We drove in silence. 10 miles out, my phone flickered back to life. I tried calling for help, but Miles slapped it out of my hand. "No recordings," he hissed. "Don't let it hear your voice." That was months ago. Miles hasn't spoken since. He communicates in writing, but only in red ink on blank white paper. No lines, no blue pens, nothing else. He refuses mirrors. Sleeps only if someone is awake beside him. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear him whisper the numbers again. As for me, I tried finding Barrow Glen again. Drove the same roads, looked for the same crooked iron signpost. Nothing. But last week, when I drove home from work, I noticed something. On the overpass near my neighborhood, someone had spray painted in dripping black letters. "Step in and be seen." And in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I swear my reflection didn't blink when I did. My name's Eli Turner, and I'm 44 years old. I work as a high school history teacher in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Teaching was never supposed to drain the life out of me, but last autumn it finally did. Between lesson planning, grading, and breaking up hallway fights, I felt like I was running on fumes. My wife told me I needed a break, something more than sitting on the couch and flipping through old war documentaries. I agreed. For once in my life, I wanted real silence, no bells, no teenage voices, no PTA parents breathing down my neck. Just me, the mountains, and time. I dug out the camping gear I hadn't touched in a decade: stove, tent, sleeping bag, and my father's old hunting knife. I wasn't chasing adventure. I just wanted to disconnect. My plan was to drive along the backroads near Cherokee National Forest, park when I found a clearing, and hike a little. Nothing ambitious. A few nights of breathing pine air sounded like medicine. But the mountains don't give medicine. They take. I left before sunrise. The road wound like a dark ribbon through ridges that looked almost black against the sky. My GPS was stubborn, recalculating every few minutes until the signal dropped altogether. About 30 miles east of a town called Wilder's Gap, I noticed the pavement change. Fresh asphalt, unnaturally smooth, but no center lines, no reflectors, just an endless black strip splitting dense trees. The forest pressed in on both sides, tight as bookends. I should have turned back. Instead, curiosity pulled me forward. 10 minutes later, I rolled past a building that didn't belong. It looked like an old feed store, brick, boarded windows, the roof sagging. But someone had painted a name across the planks in dripping white letters. Black Hollow. No gas pumps. No parking lot. Just that word staring back at me. 5 minutes later, my truck betrayed me. No warning, no sputter, just silence. I coasted to the shoulder, half into a ditch, and cursed under my breath. Popping the hood didn't help. Battery was fine. Belts intact. No smell of gas. Just dead metal. I pulled out my phone. The screen didn't show low battery. It was blank, like the power had been vacuumed out of it. So I walked. The forest swallowed sound. My boots on the pavement seemed too loud, as though the trees were waiting for me to trip. It took nearly an hour to reach the building again. Up close, Black Hollow looked less abandoned. The boards were fresh, nailed tight. A padlock the size of my fist gleamed on the front, and there were stains on the wood. Not paint, smears. Dark, uneven streaks, as though someone had dragged a hand dipped in tar or blood across the boards. A sound tickled my ears then. Tap, tap, tap. Metal on metal, faint and steady, like a pipe being struck. I told myself someone was inside, someone who could help. The main door was locked tight, but around back I found something worse. A low storm door, almost buried in earth. Just a simple latch. When I pulled it open, the tapping stopped. The air that rose up smelled of wet concrete and melted plastic. A narrow stairway led down into dark. I should have left. God, I should have left. But loneliness is its own kind of madness, and I convinced myself there'd be a landline, a generator, something. The stairs creaked under me. At the bottom, pale light leaked from a single bulb swinging overhead, enough to reveal the space. 3 long metal tables. Tools laid neatly, pliers, bone saws, clamps. Not dusty relics. Clean. Maintained. One table was covered with a thick tarp. My breath hitched. Every story I'd ever told my students about Appalachian folk remedies, moonshiners, or Depression-era killers came back at once. People disappear in these woods. Always have. I backed toward the stairs. That's when the hatch above slammed shut. My palms stung as I pounded on the locked door. That same sound returned, but louder now. Tap. Tap. Deliberate. With nowhere else to go, I turned back. The tarp drew my eyes. Against every instinct, I pulled it back. What lay beneath wasn't an animal I could name. A deer maybe once, but its legs had been stitched on backward. The flesh puckered around black sutures, some fresh, some rotting. And its chest, God help me, it rose and fell like it still breathed. A wet shuffle broke the silence. From the far corner, he emerged. A man, though not quite. His skin was pale to the point of transparency, veins like blue wires beneath. His head lolled at an angle his neck couldn't support. In one hand he held a length of barbed wire, dragging it along the floor so it screeched against the concrete. He didn't speak. He only stepped toward me, slow and crooked. I grabbed a wrench and ran. A side passage cut away from the main room, narrow and damp. My boots slipped on wet stone as I sprinted. At the end, a steel door. I kicked it once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, it gave. I tumbled into a space that made no sense. Angles warped. The ceiling dipped then soared. Fluorescent lights hummed somewhere far away, though I saw no bulbs. Hallways twisted back on themselves like intestines. I ran blindly. When I finally found stairs, I took them 2 at a time. My chest burned, my lungs begged for air. At the top, I stumbled into what looked like the front of Black Hollow. Shelves, dusty bottles, a counter. And the front door, open. Outside, there was no twilight, no stars. Just pitch black sky, the kind that presses down like a lid. I ran. God, I ran until my knees screamed. Down the endless road. Past trees that seemed to lean closer the farther I went. When I dared to glance back, the store was gone. But after what felt like an hour, I saw headlights. Relief nearly killed me. I flung myself into the middle of the road, waving my arms. A pickup stopped. The driver, a woman in her 50s, opened her window. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a bottle of water and told me to get in. I did. Here's the part that haunts me. When she drove me into town, she never turned the wheel. The road shifted on its own, dipping, winding, unfolding, as though it didn't exist until we reached it. I stared out the window and realized the tree-lean never changed. Same knot in the bark, same leaning pine, repeating over and over like scenery painted on a wheel. I kept my mouth shut. In the morning, I rented a car, left my truck behind. I haven't seen it since. Weeks later, back at school, I mentioned the word Black Hollow to an older custodian who grew up deeper in Appalachia. His face drained of color. He told me stories whispered in his county, that Black Hollow wasn't a place but a hollow road, a stretch that appears when you've lost your way. Folks say it's where the old mountain healers and bone setters dragged their patients when cures went wrong. A place the land itself kept, long after those people were gone. Once you step inside, you're part of it. I've been home for months, but every so often I hear it. A faint tap, tap, tap against the pipes in my basement. And last night, when I glanced out my window, I swear I saw my truck parked under the streetlight. Empty. Waiting. My name is Ethan Price, and I used to work as a paramedic in Charleston. I've seen car wrecks that looked more like scrap metal than vehicles, overdoses where you could smell death in the room before you saw it, and houses where silence told you everything you needed to know. But nothing in 15 years of emergency calls prepared me for a simple drive I took through the Appalachians last autumn. I wasn't going anywhere important. After a particularly bad call, a teenage driver I couldn't save, I took 3 days off and decided to clear my head. Just me, a tank of gas, and a route that cut through Seneca Rocks and the ridges east of the Monongahela. I thought the isolation might help. It didn't. I left before sunrise, a thermos of gas station coffee sloshing in the cup holder, podcasts humming low to fill the quiet. By mid-morning, I was weaving into back roads. The forest crowded closer, the asphalt cracked and narrow. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. That's when I noticed him. A man standing by the white line at mile marker 118. He was tall, rail-thin, and wore a gray rain jacket zipped all the way to his throat. No pack, no water, no car in sight. Just standing there with his arms slack at his sides, staring at the tree-line. As I passed, his head turned slowly, deliberate, mechanical. His eyes locked on mine, wide, unblinking. I told myself it was nothing. Hikers do strange things out here. Still, I caught myself gripping the wheel harder. 20 minutes later, I rounded a bend at mile marker 126. He was there again. Same man. Same jacket. Same posture. I whispered, "No way." I scanned the shoulder for side roads or trails. Nothing. Just a wall of pine and a ditch full of wet leaves. He hadn't walked here. Couldn't have. But he was standing exactly as before, head tilted toward me, eyes bulging like he'd been expecting me. I kept driving. By mile 132, I saw him a third time. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, heart rattling against my ribs. I climbed out of the car, boots crunching the stones. The forest was so still I could hear my own breath. No birds. No insects. Just silence that pressed against my eardrums until they rang. I walked 20 feet back, scanning the trees. No one. No footprints. When I slid back into the driver's seat, my fingers shook against the steering wheel. I didn't say it aloud, but I thought it. This road isn't right. By 3 o'clock, I pulled into a place called Johnson's Market, a leaning gas station that looked like it hadn't seen paint in 20 years. One buzzing fluorescent lit the inside. A young man sat behind the counter scrolling a cracked phone screen. He barely looked up when I grabbed a bottle of water and some peanuts. As he rang me up, he asked, "You headed east?" I nodded. "Highland County." He studied me for a long second, then asked, "You seen him yet?" "Seen who?" "Tall fella. Gray jacket. Doesn't blink." My throat dried. "Maybe." The cashier leaned closer. His eyes flicked to the window and back. "If you see him more than once," he said flatly, "don't stop after dark. That's when he follows." He said it like he was reciting a recipe. Then he bagged my peanuts and went back to his phone. I stayed on the road long past, when I should have stopped. The cashier's words replayed in my head like a warning I didn't want to understand. At mile marker 146, I saw him again, this time closer to the center line, waiting. As my car rolled past, he lifted one arm and pointed directly at me. My stomach plunged. The motion was small, subtle, but it felt like a nail driven through my chest. I floored the gas. Dusk was bleeding into the ridges when I spotted hazard lights blinking ahead. A red Jeep idled crooked on the shoulder. A man waved both arms as I approached. I cracked my window. "You okay?" He limped toward me, clutching his arm. His sleeve was soaked in blood. "I hit something," he gasped. "It wasn't a deer." "It was." He froze. His eyes flicked to the trees. I followed his gaze. There he was, the man in gray, standing 20 feet in, half hidden by the shadows, watching. I rolled the window up and stomped the accelerator. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't care if the Jeep driver bled out. Survival drowned out compassion. By 7, my fuel light was on. I hadn't thought of anything but escape for miles. My sister texted twice. I didn't answer. I coasted into a scenic overlook called Fox Ridge Point, engine coughing and killed the ignition. The ridges spread below, purple with shadow. For the first time all day I breathed. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, crunching leaves behind me. I turned. Nothing. Another step. 3 figures emerged from the tree line. All tall, all thin, all wearing gray jackets. Their heads turned in eerie unison, eyes fixed wide and empty. I stumbled back into my car, turned the key. Nothing. Dead silence. The figures drifted closer, stopping just short of the fence. A face pressed against my window, fogging the glass. Then came the knocking. Not pounding, just 3 soft, patient taps. Then from the other side, 3 more. Then from the windshield. They were circling me, knocking in rhythm, like they were waiting for something to answer. I ducked into the back seat, clutching the tire iron under the floor mat, hands trembling too hard to grip. And then, the knocking stopped. No sound, no movement. 10 minutes crawled past before I tried the key again. The engine roared to life like nothing had ever been wrong. I drove the last 2 hours without looking in the mirrors. When I finally reached the edge of Highland County, I pulled into a motel parking lot, collapsed onto the bed, and slept like the dead. In the morning, I remembered my dash cam. Part of me didn't want to check it, but I needed proof. Something to tell me I hadn't gone mad. I pulled the footage onto my laptop. At first, it showed only what I remembered: the winding road, the mile markers, the silhouettes in gray. Then, as the knocking started, I saw something else. A figure stepped into view behind my car, visible in the faint glow of my taillights. It was me, my own face, pale and expressionless, walking slowly behind the vehicle. The real me never left the driver's seat. I deleted the file, but the memory remains. Now every time I drive past a mile marker, I catch myself checking the shoulder. And sometimes, when the road is quiet, the radio low, I see him in the corner of my eye. Tall, gray jacket, unblinking, waiting for me to stop. I was 33 the autumn I decided I needed to leave the city behind. Not forever, just long enough to breathe. I taught history at a small community college in South Carolina, and after 10 years of grading papers written by students who confused the Civil War with the Revolutionary one, I'd had enough. That semester, a colleague joked that I looked like someone haunted by fluorescent lights. He wasn't wrong. My office smelled of copy toner and old coffee. My apartment shared thin walls with a couple who screamed more than they spoke, and the thought of spending another winter boxed in by routine made my chest tighten. So I cashed in the small sabbatical grant I'd been hoarding, packed a duffel with hiking gear, notebooks, and a battered camera, and pointed my old Jeep toward the Blue Ridge. My plan was simple: trace the lesser-known ridges and hollows between western North Carolina and eastern Kentucky, document ghost towns, forgotten battlefields, and maybe write something worth reading later. What I didn't plan for was Lantern Road. I had been following the Nantahala River up toward the state line when my GPS, chirpy even with no service, suggested a detour. Lantern Road saves 38 minutes. The map showed a thin gray line twisting like a snake through forest that had no names printed over it. I'd grown used to these mountain shortcuts. Half the charm of the Appalachians lies in roads that feel stolen from another century. Gravel lanes, single-track bridges, towns with hand-painted post office signs. Lantern Road looked like one of those. The first mile confirmed it: gravel crunching under tires, ditches filled with last week's rain. The kind of silence that presses against the windshield until you realize you've been holding your breath. The trees grew so close they knitted into a roof overhead. The name nagged at me, though. Lantern Road. It sounded too deliberate, too much like a story you weren't supposed to follow. It was just past 4 in the afternoon, though in that tunnel of trees it felt like dusk when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of a barbed wire fence, pale against the dark pines. Barefoot, a long skirt that might have been white once, now the color of creek water. She didn't wave. She didn't step forward. She only watched as I rolled past at 20 miles an hour. I slowed the Jeep, cracked the window. "You all right out here?" Her head tilted, not like a question but like recognition. The look you give someone you've been waiting on. No sound. No shift in expression. I told myself she was just some farmer's daughter or a lost hiker. But I pressed the lock button on the door without meaning to. 2 bends later, I nearly hit the wreck. An old Ford pickup shoved nose first into a ravine. Rust had eaten most of the doors. Moss grew thick on the windshield. But the thing that froze me, a lantern sat upright on the hood. A glass chimney kind, dented but intact, wick black with old smoke. No dust, no leaves, no spider webs. Someone had placed it there recently. I got out long enough to snap a picture on my phone, though I already knew it wouldn't save. No signal. The forest smelled damp and metallic, like a basement where water had sat too long. When I climbed back in, the road seemed darker than before. 5 miles deeper, low on gas and nerves, I reached a cluster of buildings. A sign half buried in weeds read, Calvert's Hollow, EST 1908. Population blank. Someone had chiseled the number out. The place looked deserted. One boarded grocery, a church with a collapsed steeple, and a gas station with its lights flickering weak yellow. I pulled in, praying the pump wasn't just decoration. A hand-lettered sign taped to the glass read, Pay inside. Inside smelled like mildew and raw meat left too long. Behind the counter stood a man who might have been carved out of the same wood as the counter itself. Wrinkled face, blank cap, shirt that had lost its original color decades ago. I offered him a 20. Pump 1, please. He took it without a word, shuffled outside. While I waited, I glanced across the street. The diner windows were fogged, coated thick with condensation. Someone had drawn a spiral into the glass. And just beyond that spiral, visible through the mist, her again. The same woman. Same skirt, same stare. She was closer this time, as though she'd been walking since I first passed her. You know her? I asked the cashier when he came back. He didn't even glance where I pointed. His voice was flat, practiced. Ain't no women walkin' Lantern Road. Like he'd said it before. Many times. I drove hard after that. The Jeep rattled on the gravel, branches scraping the roof like fingernails. But every curve, every rise in the road, she was there. Sometimes by a ditch. Sometimes high on a ridge, visible between trunks. Always barefoot. Always facing me. Once, I swear, she held a lantern. Its glow was faint, orange, swaying as though in wind I couldn't feel. By then, the sun had dropped low, and shadows stretched until the forest seemed to breathe with them. My pulse drummed harder than the engine. When a crooked sign promised Hollow Crest in 1 mile, I nearly cried with relief. The Jeep was running on fumes. The inn stood like a skeleton of hospitality. 2 stories of peeling paint, a neon vacancy sign buzzing fitfully. The woman at the desk looked worn thin by years. Hair pulled back, cardigan full of holes. She slid a brass key marked Room 6 across the counter without asking for ID. Wi-Fi? I asked, more out of habit than hope. Her answer was almost a whisper. No need for that here. The room smelled of mold and wood smoke. The carpet squished underfoot. The bedspread bore a circular burn in the center, neat as if made by a candle left too long. I locked the door, slid the chain, shoved the dresser in front of it. Still, unease prickled the back of my neck. At midnight it started. First a creak, floorboards where no one walked. Then 3 deliberate taps against the window. I pulled the curtain aside an inch. Her face was pressed against the glass. Skin gray as wet ash, veins spidering beneath. Her eyes too wide, as though stretched open from within. And in her hand, yes, this time I saw it clear, she held a lantern. The flame guttered without sound. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, but no voice came out. Only the faint flicker of the flame pulsing in time with her breath. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. I didn't bother with shoes. I grabbed the Jeep keys, shoved open the bathroom window, and dropped into the gravel outside. My knee tore open against the stones, but I barely felt it. I ran for the Jeep, threw myself inside, turned the ignition. The headlights flared just in time to reveal her standing in the middle of the road, lantern raised high. The flame inside spun in a spiral pattern, hypnotic, like the one drawn on the diner glass. I floored it. She didn't move. And somehow, God help me, the Jeep passed right through her. The lantern's glow filled the cab for a moment before snuffing out. I didn't stop until Lexington, Kentucky. By then the gas gauge was somehow back to half full, though I never filled it. I searched for Calvert's Hollow, for Lantern Road. Nothing. No ghost town records, no maps, no census lists. Not even in the historical archives I trusted more than my own memory. But the lantern soot stain remains on my backseat window, shaped like a spiral. I've scrubbed it with every cleaner I could buy. It won't fade, and sometimes when I drive after dark, I catch the faintest glow in the trees beside the highway. A light that sways as though carried by a hand I can't see. I still teach history, but I've stopped taking back roads. Because out here, in these mountains, some roads are remembered only by the ones who never left them. I was 36 when the mountains called me back. Not in some romantic, wanderlust kind of way, more like an itch you can't stop scratching. My name's Daniel Crow, and for the better part of a decade I'd worked as a traveling surveyor for construction outfits across the Midwest. Measuring distances, marking boundaries, staring at horizons for hours. I liked the solitude more than the work. After my last contract fizzled, I returned to Ohio thinking I'd put my feet up for a while. But city life suffocated me. Too many lights, too many people with somewhere to be. So when my cousin Aaron suggested a drive down through the coal country backroads, I said yes without hesitation. Aaron was a journalist, the kind who chased half-dead rumors until they either evaporated or exploded. He'd been digging into old disappearances around the Appalachian plateau, and he wanted photos, interviews, anything physical to prop up his research. I think he mostly wanted company, and I didn't mind being a set of eyes in the passenger seat. We loaded my battered Ford Escape with maps, notebooks, a cooler of cheap food, and set off in mid-October. The plan was loose: snake our way from southern Ohio through northern West Virginia, avoiding interstates and sticking to county roads. That was how we found the Ashwood Cutoff. We were somewhere east of Clarksburg when we saw the Dieter sign, a plank nailed to a leaning post red in faded red paint. Ashwood, use if you dare. Aaron pulled over to snap a picture. Locals making jokes, he said. Or a warning. The GPS, useless since we'd lost service, still showed a gray road curling through the mountains. A shortcut that rejoined the main route near Tucker County. Shave half an hour, Aaron said. Want to risk it? I should have said no. The day was already dimming, and the ridgelines looked like teeth against the sky. But part of me was restless for something different. Let's go. The pavement ended almost immediately, giving way to packed dirt. Branches arched overhead until daylight vanished into green twilight. It felt less like a road, and more like a tunnel dug through centuries of forest. 2 miles in, we saw her. She stood at the edge of a stone fence, barefoot on leaves slick with rain. A long dress clung to her frame, though it wasn't white or blue like the old ghost cliches. It was the color of soot, almost blending with the trees. In her hand, she held a stub of candle. The flame did not waver, even though the air was moving. Aaron slowed, rolled down his window. "Ma'am, you all right?" No answer. She just watched us pass. Her face wasn't lifeless exactly. More like she was recognizing us, checking our faces against something she already knew. I told Aaron to keep driving. He didn't argue. Not long after, we came across a collapsed wagon half swallowed by brush. The wood was blackened like it had burned, though there was no sign of ash. Resting on the broken wheel was another candle, melted into a stub. The wick was black, as though it had been burning recently. I got out for a closer look. The forest smelled faintly of tallow, old and sour. My boot pressed into the mud, and beneath it I swore I heard a hollow knock, like a door closing beneath the earth. Aaron snapped a photo, muttering to himself. Disappearances, burnt wagons, the whole mountain feeds on recycled legends. We didn't talk after that. The road led us into a hollow that shouldn't have been there. No maps, no signs, no power lines. Yet an old filling station stood at the clearing's center, sagging under ivy. The sign above the pump read, Ashwood Fuel and Supply. Aaron grinned. Gold mine. No one's recorded this place. The pump handle dangled, its hose cracked. A door stood open just enough to show the counter inside. Candy wrappers scattered the floor, faded brands I'd never seen. And on the counter, another candle lit. The air inside reeked of wax and mildew. The flame didn't flicker, though there was no glass to shield it. Aaron raised his camera. That was when we heard it. A slow, deliberate thump under the floorboards, followed by another, like heavy boots pacing below. We left without discussion, climbing back into the escape. The forest swallowed the station behind us as though it had never been there. We drove for 15 minutes in silence, wheels spitting gravel. Then Aaron cursed. Up ahead, the filling station again. Same tilted roof, same ivy, same open door. We didn't turn around, I said. He nodded tightly. Then the road did. He tried reversing, spinning the wheel. Still, the station waited ahead. I looked into the treeline. For just a second, I thought I saw her again, the woman with the candle. Only this time, her face was wrong. Too long, mouth too wide, eyes reflecting like wet stones. When I blinked, she was gone. Finally, the road curved into a clearing none of us expected. There, half sunk into weeds, stood a rusted yellow school bus. Its windows were shattered, tires missing, but the lettering on the side was still legible, Ashwood Elementary. Aaron's face drained of color. That school burned down in 1979. My editor told me there were stories. Whole classrooms gone. Inside the bus, something shifted. A bang of metal against metal. Then 3 deliberate knocks, spaced too evenly to be an accident. The hairs on my arms rose. Back in the car, I said. But before we could move, the knocking stopped. In its place came voices. Children's voices, faint and overlapping, reciting something too low to catch. Aaron froze. They're saying names. I didn't wait to listen. I shoved him toward the escape, and we slammed the doors shut. The road eventually split at a fork. No signposts, no landmarks, just a wooden board nailed to a tree. On it were carved words, return or remain. Aaron leaned forward. That's not a warning. It's an instruction. I turned left, praying it meant return. Instead, the forest opened into a ring of cabins. 6 of them identical, doors aligned in a perfect circle. The road behind us was gone, swallowed into the trees. One by one, every cabin door creaked open. No footsteps, no voices, just doors, swinging wide like they'd been waiting. From within the nearest, candlelight glowed. Dozens of flames, all burning steady. Aaron whispered, they're watching. I floored the accelerator, steering blindly into the trees. Branches whipped against the windshield, roots buckled the tires. The escape slammed down hard on a rock, sparks spitting, but I kept going. The forest thinned suddenly, spitting us onto asphalt. Headlights illuminated a green highway sign. Welcome to Elkins. We were back in the world again. Or so we thought. We pulled into a Walmart parking lot and parked under the buzzing lights. Neither of us spoke for hours. Eventually, Aaron reached into the back seat to grab his camera. That's when we saw it. On the seat between us lay a folded strip of paper, damp as though from creek water. One side read, "You chose return." The other, "Some do not." Aaron stared at it until his hands shook. "Dan, I didn't bring this in. Neither did I. It's been months since Ashwood. Aaron hasn't written about it, not one word. He says his editor wouldn't believe him, but I think he's afraid. His apartment reeks faintly of melted wax now, though he won't admit it. As for me, I still have the escape. Its rearview mirror has a permanent stain, a smudge shaped like a flame no cleaner will scrub away. At night, when I drive past wooded stretches, I sometimes catch the reflection of a candle burning steady. Always steady, never flickering, and if I glance too long into the dark beyond the road, I see her again, waiting, because the Ashwood cutoff doesn't end. It follows, and sooner or later, it will ask me again to choose. I was 29 when I traded city skylines for ridgelines. My name is Thomas Hale, and I work as a field cartographer. Most people don't realize that even in the 21st century there are patches of land, entire hollows and stretches of forest, that have never been properly surveyed. A grant from the university in Charleston had me driving through Appalachian backroads, updating outdated county maps. My job was supposed to be simple: measure terrain, note landmarks, photograph abandoned structures if I came across them. What nobody told me was that the land itself sometimes pushes back when you try to capture it on paper. Unlike photographers or travel bloggers chasing aesthetics, my work was about accuracy. Students, researchers, developers, they relied on my maps. If I didn't mark a road that existed, someone would eventually drive off the edge of the known world. That autumn, the assignment took me toward the rugged ridges straddling eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia. Sparse cell reception, endless trees, places forgotten even by locals. Exactly the kind of land I both loved and feared. The project schedule was tight, and I often slept in my vehicle rather than wasting hours looking for motels. I had a sleeping bag that fit neatly across the folded back seats of my Subaru, a cooler of canned food, and stacks of topographic sheets littering the passenger side. Nights alone on the road didn't scare me. At least, not until the night I stumbled into Wraith's Hollow. By late afternoon, after driving since sunrise, I rolled into a tiny gas station that wasn't marked on my grid. It sat 20 miles past the last named town on my notes, wedged between two ridges like a relic dropped and forgotten. The place hadn't seen a broom since the 1990s. The air smelled of stale oil and wet plywood. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the pavement. I parked by the only working pump and went inside. The man behind the counter, mid-60s, gray beard, sleeves shoved up on a filthy sweatshirt, didn't bother to greet me. I asked for 20 on pump 2. He pressed the register without a word. When I stepped back outside, I realized the station was completely encircled by forest. No houses, no visible road branching off. Just thick timber hemming me in like an audience. For the first time that day, a thought crept in. If the Subaru dies out here, I'm finished. After filling up, I drove north, planning to camp at a rest stop marked on one of the older maps. My routine was always the same: lock the car, fold down the seats, sleep until first light. But when I finally found the spot, it wasn't a rest stop anymore. Orange mesh fencing sagged around the lot. Signs warned, closed due to unsafe conditions. The picnic tables lay splintered, bathroom doors chained. It looked abandoned for years. I considered doubling back, but then I noticed a hand-painted sign nailed to a tree. Wraith's Hollow, 3 miles. It looked amateur, the lettering uneven, but exhaustion convinced me there might be a church lot or small hamlet up ahead where I could park without hassle. I followed the narrow climb, trees pressing tighter the higher I went. A mile later, the road split into a sharp Y. No markings, no county sign. Both paths looked equally worn. For no reason I can explain, I steered left. The trees thinned into a clearing that once might have been a town. What remained? A church with a leaning bell tower, a square post office barely bigger than a shed, and a rusted pickup truck buried halfway under vines. No lights, no movement. I pulled in front of the church, parked just off the road. Silence wrapped the clearing. No crickets, no wind. Something about that silence was heavier than normal. I told myself it was fine, locked the doors, crawled into the back. One boot stayed on, just in case. I must have dozed off before 9. No dreams, no drift. Just sudden awake. My head smacked the glass when I jerked up. Then came the sound. A slow scrape. Deliberate. Right along the driver's side door. I froze. Listened. Another scrape, this time behind my head. The passenger side. Long and careful, like a nail dragging against paint. My heart kicked against my ribs. I slid forward to peek out the window. Nothing there, just moonlight pooling over the gravel and the skeletal outline of the general store. Then movement. Behind the rusted pickup truck. Someone ducking down, as though they knew I was watching. I groped for my keys. Had I locked the doors? I couldn't remember. Panic surged, and I pressed the button anyway. The lock snapped down. That's when I saw him. He stood 6 feet away, barefoot, shirtless, jeans wet up to the knees. His arms dangled like dead weight, his hair plastered flat. He didn't look at me, he stared at the ground, unmoving. His chest rose once, shallow, then he stepped closer. I twisted the key. Headlights flared, and that's when I saw the others. 3 of them stood in a line across the narrow road ahead, motionless, blocking my exit. One gripped a length of chain, another a jagged stick, the third held nothing but stared blankly into the beams. None of them flinched against the glare. I dropped the Subaru into reverse, tires screaming against gravel. The barefoot man sprinted after me. His palm smacked against the rear panel. The sound was too human, too real. I hit the fork again. This time I swung hard right. The road pitched down. My hands locked tight on the wheel. That's when my high beams illuminated it. A deer, bloated and stiff across the asphalt. Legs bent backward, belly swollen, eyes a crawling mass of flies. I swerved, nearly skidding into the ditch. The stench leaked through the vents, sickly sweet. I didn't slow again until another sign appeared, lit by a cracked lamp post. Miller's Fork. A modern gas station sat just beyond the sign, buzzing fluorescent lights painting the lot in jittery blue. I stumbled inside. The woman at the counter, 40s, hair tied back, flannel shirt, looked me over. "You all right? You look like you've seen the devil himself." I swallowed hard. "Is there a motel nearby?" She nodded 2 blocks down. That night I slept with every light on, a chair braced under the knob. By morning, I convinced myself fatigue and fear had exaggerated everything. I drove back determined to mark the road properly. I needed proof, for myself if nothing else. But the fork wasn't there. The asphalt stretched whole and unbroken. Trees pressed right up to the shoulder, thick and untouched. No split, no gravel spur, no hollow. The church, the post office, the figures, all gone. Back at the gas station, I asked the clerk if she'd heard of Wraith's Hollow. She frowned. "Ain't no place called that. Not around here." She went back to stocking cigarettes, not meeting my eyes again. Weeks later, back in Charleston, I pored over county records. Buried in a journal from 1893, I found a single reference. Wraith's Hollow, a settlement abandoned after the fever year. Survivors claimed figures walked the streets at night, drawn from the woods, dragging chains across doors. They warn travelers, the hollow chooses who may stay. Few return. I don't camp in my vehicle anymore. I book motels, no matter the cost. But here's the part one never told anyone. The Subaru still carries the handprint. Faint, greasy, stamped into the metal near the rear wheel well. No soap, no buffer, no solvent erases it. Sometimes, when headlights catch it just right, I swear it looks wet again. And if I stare too long at that print, I hear the scrape, slow and deliberate, tracing across my door. My name is Claire Matthews, and I was 26 when I made the worst detour of my life. At the time, I was between things, between jobs, between apartments, between ideas of who I was supposed to be. After finishing a contract as an archivist at a museum in Pittsburgh, I decided to indulge in a strange obsession of mine, collecting photographs of forgotten places. I'd always been drawn to sites that history had erased, shuttered diners, washed-out bridges, churches that leaned at impossible angles. I thought if I could preserve them in some way, it gave their stories a second life. So I loaded my aging Honda CR-V with my camera gear, camping kit, and a mess of notebooks, and I pointed myself toward the lesser-traveled ridges of eastern Kentucky. My motivation wasn't sightseeing, it was escape. I wanted to vanish for a while, to be swallowed by the mountains, where no one expected me to answer emails or small-talk my way through office parties. By day 3, I was already knee-deep into country that maps had all but abandoned. The paved highways gave way to patched backroads, then to gravel lanes that seemed to curl endlessly through forest. My cell signal dropped into nothingness, and it didn't bother me. If anything, I relished it. That was before I saw the sign. It was nailed crookedly to a tree, weathered and nearly consumed by moss. Painted in stark, white block letters, Ashbridge Gap for miles. No arrow, no mention on my maps, just the name. It stuck in my head immediately. Ashbridge Gap. It didn't sound real, not like the practical names most of these hollows had. It sounded like something from a folktale, whispered at a campfire. I almost kept driving. But the more I thought about it, the more it clawed at me. I rationalized, maybe there was a church, maybe a schoolyard, something photographable. Besides, I told myself, these were exactly the sorts of places I came out here to find. I turned off onto the road. The asphalt cracked into gravel within a quarter mile. The trees closed ranks, their canopies knitting together overhead until daylight seemed swallowed whole. My headlights cut pale beams through the green-dark tunnel. I passed 2 houses along the way. The first was sagging under its own weight, its porch stacked with rusting washing machines. The second was boarded from the inside. No mailboxes, no sound. I told myself I'd seen worse. Half a mile further, I braked hard. A school bus sat rotting by the ditch, its windows fogged from the inside. Through the grime, I realized it wasn't empty. Its interior was jammed floor to ceiling with split firewood. Logs stacked so perfectly it looked intentional, as though the bus had been converted into a woodshed. The image unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. I snapped a photo and kept going. Before the gravel gave out completely, I came across a wooden structure leaning under a corrugated tin roof. A faded sign above the porch read, Ashbridge General. It looked more like a prop than a real store. The porch sagged like a broken spine, and the paint had long since surrendered to mildew. Still, my throat was dry, and I figured I could at least try for water. Inside smelled of dust, damp paper, and something faintly sweet, like apples left too long to rot. A single bulb flickered overhead, its hum far too loud. A cooler buzzed in the back, its door fogged with condensation. Behind the counter stood a man in a denim shirt. He was tall, his face gaunt, eyes pale blue and unblinking. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me like I'd trespassed into a place I didn't belong. Finally, flatly, he asked, "You need fuel?" His voice carried no inflection. "Just water," I said. He raised an arm slowly and pointed toward the cooler. I fetched a jug, placed a 10 on the counter. He didn't touch it, didn't even glance down. His eyes never moved from me. I walked out without another word. Only then did I notice the second figure, an old man in a rocking chair by the door, his beard stained yellow, teeth mostly gone. He chewed slowly, eyes locked on me. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just followed me with his gaze all the way back to the car. Another mile on, I hit a wooden gate across the road. Not locked, not chained, just shut. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I'd already committed, and curiosity outweighed caution. I got out, unlatched the post, and drove through. The road beyond was barely wide enough for my tires. Ditches on both sides, trees leaning so close I worried they'd scrape my paint. After 10 tense minutes, it spilled into a wide gravel clearing. In the center stood a half-collapsed fire tower. Its stairwell was broken halfway up, rungs eaten through with rot. I assumed this was Ashbridge Gap. There was no overlook, no view, just trees choking the horizon in every direction. I was too tired to argue with myself. I parked near the tower, locked the doors, and rolled out my mat in the back of the CRV. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the crunch of gravel. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I didn't breathe. A beam of light swept across the trees. Left. Right. Closer. A flashlight. I ducked down, heart pounding, trying to make myself invisible. The light clicked off. Silence followed. I don't remember falling back asleep. It was more like passing out in waves of adrenaline. By dawn, my mouth was dry as sand. I climbed out to stretch and froze. A boot print marked the gravel near the driver's door. Deep. Fresh. Not mine. I scrambled into the driver's seat and jammed the key in. Nothing. No click. No hum. No lights on the dash. The car was dead. I tried again. Still nothing. The panic that had been simmering all night boiled over. I left a note in the windshield, my name, phone number, where I'd gone, and slung my bag over my shoulder. I'd walk back to the general store. Someone would help. 2 hours later, I reached the gate. The post still stood, but the crossbar was gone. I stepped over and pressed on. Not long after, I spotted tire tracks. Wide ones. fresh. They cut right over my own. My stomach dropped. By the time I reached the general store, my legs were shaking. The porch was empty, the rocking chair vacant. The front door hung open. Inside, silence. No hum, no buzzing cooler. The bulb had burned out. The $10 bill still sat on the counter. Behind it, a raccoon lay bloated, flies buzzing so thick the air seemed to vibrate. I stumbled backward, while rising in my throat. That's when I heard it. Someone calling my name. Soft at first, then louder. The same pitch, the same tone, over and over, flat, rehearsed, like a child reading lines in a school play. Claire. Matthews. I didn't look back. I ran. Somewhere down the road, I saw something dangling from a tree branch. A shirt. Bright red. My shirt. The one I'd folded in my car. It was tied neatly with red twine, knotted in ways I didn't recognize. I ran harder, branches clawing at my face. When I finally reached the clearing again, the CRV was gone. Not towed. Not vandalized. Gone. The gravel was smooth, undisturbed, as though no vehicle had ever been there. I spun in circles, gasping, desperate. That's when I noticed the trail. A narrow slit in the trees, nearly invisible. I followed. It opened into another clearing. 6 vehicles sat arranged in a ring. All rusted, all stripped of plates, their glass fogged from the inside. At the center stood a structure of rotting wood and rebar, shaped like a teepee. Inside, bones, animal and human, jumbled together. Skulls staring upward, ribs stacked like kindling. I staggered backward. That's when I saw him, the man from the store, standing at the tree line, denim shirt faded, walkie-talkie in hand. He pressed the button. Got her. I ran. Branches tore my skin. My lungs burned. I didn't stop until I burst out onto asphalt, where a highway worker leaned on a shovel. His eyes went wide as I stumbled toward him, bleeding and gasping. Holy hell, he said, dropping the shovel. What happened to you? I couldn't speak. Just shook my head. He drove me to a ranger station. They called deputies. I told them everything. They searched. Dogs. Drones. Volunteers. They found nothing. No store. No gate. No fire tower. Locals swore no one had ever heard of Ashbridge Gap. A week later, the police called. My Honda had been found in a grocery store parking lot in Athens, Ohio. Keys on the seat. Spotless. No fingerprints. No dust. No trace I had ever driven it through the mountains. I don't tell this story often, because every time I do, I hear it again. The voice, calling my name. Flat. Rehearsed. As though whoever, or whatever, lives in Ashbridge Gap still hasn't finished with me.